Hello, friends. This is Melody, an adult programmer for the Scenic Regional Library. Welcome to this month's installation of Missouri State Park Showcase. I fudged a bit in this episode. We are actually featuring Mingo National Wildlife Refuge, which is under the National Fish and Wildlife Service, so not actually a state park. But there is really no other place like it in Missouri. Our guest visitor center ranger, Debbie Koenigs, will explain the history of the park in more detail, but it is an ancient abandoned basin of the Mississippi River. Once Missouri had thousands of acres of hardwood swampland, but through logging and draining projects to create farmland, it gradually disappeared. Mingo is a glimpse of what once was. It's an essential stop for millions of migrating birds and home to otters, muskrats, deer, beavers, and swamp rabbits. It's 21,592 acres of amazing wilderness just at our doorstep. At the end of the presentation, there'll be information about the park, the address, how to contact, the website, and there'll also be lists of more content from the Scenic Regional
Hello,
Library.
everyone.
Thank
My
you
name
for
is
joining
Debbie
us.
Koenigs, and I'm the Visitor Services Park Ranger at Mingo National Wildlife Refuge in Buckeye, Missouri. I'm excited to join you today from an area that looks a little bit different than maybe what you'd expect to find in Missouri, but it's an amazing area to learn about and to visit. So I hope you'll learn some new things and come and see us soon. So we're part of a series here highlighting state parks in Missouri, but we've snuck in, even though we're a federal property. We're part of the National Wildlife Refuge System within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is under the Department of the Interior. We're kind of a sister agency to the National Park Service. And our particular refuge, Mingo, was established in 1944 under the authority of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act as an inviolate sanctuary for migratory birds. It was also established to protect the largest remaining tract of intact bottomland hardwood forest remaining in southeast Missouri, in an area that was once part of 2.5 million acres of bottomland hardwood. We were also established because we're an important unit for waterfowl on the Mississippi Flyway. During the winter, we can provide refuge for up to 100,000 ducks and 12,000 geese at our peak, which is usually about mid-December. So if you see the green dot highlighting where we are, and this map is showing kind of especially where ducks and geese use the Mississippi migratory flyway. So you can see all those red dots that are just south of us. That whole area is kind of the most important wintering migration area for ducks and geese in the US. So just to give you some context, we're a little bit of a distance from the New Haven branch of the library. A little bit over a 3-hour drive. It looks like from the route that Google Maps highlighted that it's a windy, interesting drive to get here the quickest, but can also be reached from major interstates. So I will give you a little bit more information about getting here. And we're, if you're familiar at all with Poplar Bluff and Dexter, we're about a half an hour drive from either of those towns. So the refuge itself is located kind of across the middle of Stoddard and Wayne counties in southeast Missouri. It's a total of 21,500 acres, which is about 34 square miles. And it also includes, highlighted here in orange on the map, kind of the western half of the refuge is almost 7,800 acres of wilderness, federal wilderness area, established within the refuge, within the overall refuge. So a little bit about how we came to be. We started you know, as like I mentioned, millions of acres of bottomland hardwood forest, very swampy, bald cypress swamp. Before European settlement, uh, it was seen as, you know, to people, it was seen as kind of unusable land. But as we later found out, it's critical habitat for wildlife. But in the meantime, it was full of old growth forests and a little bit of prairie, but Mingo looked a lot like what you see in this picture. When people started to settle the area, they first logged the refuge for timber. Um, Cypress wood is still remains a very valuable wood for a lot of uses. And they pretty much clear cut the refuge except for the lowest lying, swampiest areas. As they cleared the refuge, they still had a lot of standing water that made it unusable for the purposes that settlers wanted to use it for. So they began, and all of southeast Missouri began creating a ditch system. And there's something like 6,000 miles of ditches in this area. So they dug a series of ditches, which still remain today, and we use them for different purposes. But they wanted to drain off the land for agricultural use, which didn't turn out great. There were existing family farms before these actions were taken, kind of on the higher lying areas. But in the lowlands, and even today with ditches, it's very difficult to plant some of the land and crops. We're basically in a basin, so there are bluffs on both sides. There's Crowley's Ridge on the east side of our refuge, and the beginning of the Ozark foothills on the west side. So between that is a big bowl, and we get a lot of rainfall, and it sticks around and causes at least flash flooding, if not longer lasting water standing on the refuge. So after all that clearing and ditching, you had a kind of a bare landscape, which left room for pretty severe erosion. And it's at that point, kind of through a number of reasons, that the refuge land was purchased by the the predecessor of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is what was inherited. But it's amazing how resilient land can be. And now it's a completely different setting, it's a completely different habitat. We've regained so much in terms of quality of habitat and abundance of wildlife that use it. So I talked a little bit about the landscape, but we have a wide variety of habitat and landscape on the refuge. Here's some pictures of basically what bottomland hardwood forest looks like. It's basically forest in areas that can flood, whether it be in the winter or periodically from heavier rainstorms. We actually allow a portion of the refuge to flood in the winter to provide duck habitat. They like to swim around in real shallow water in the forest. We also have a portion of the refuge that's bald cypress, tupelo swamp, and then also open wetlands that stays somewhat flooded for a good portion of the year. The picture on the right is our Boardwalk nature trail. That's a fully accessible 1 mile loop trail. that kind of gives you the experience of what the swamp looks like without having to be down in it. We manage what are called moist soil units. So they are former farm fields that now we may plant crops in these units, or we may just let them lie fallow. And then in the winter, they're allowed to flood again for waterfowl habitat. We have some upland forests, kind of just what it sounds like, higher ground, rockier, some different tree species, but also hardwoods, oak and hickory. The majority of the species are oak and hickory. But you can see in the picture, blooming is one of my favorites, the red buckeye. So it's a very small tree or shrub that we see in the spring, blooming just beautifully with those large red blossoms. Before you know it, we'll be there and they'll be blooming. So just to mention again, we provide habitat and resources for a huge biodiverse amount of plants and animals. The refuge supports 247 species of birds, over 60 species of amphibians and reptiles. Yes, we have a lot of snakes. I spared everyone snake pictures, but actually we have a lot of snake fans who come out to the refuge. 40 species of mammal, huge diversity of mushrooms and other fungus. The Missouri Mycological Society does a survey, and they've determined over 500 species. And then just, I can't even put a number on the species of plants that are that exist on the refuge, and rare ones. So it's a very interesting place to experience, both as a visitor and as someone who works here. That I'm always discovering something new. Just some additional pictures of some of the critters that we find here. Lots of turtles. We were actually even out the other day before we had this cold snap. Lots of insects, including mosquitoes, but I don't think any worse than anywhere else. And they're not insects, but we do have a lot of ticks too. Lots of butterflies and other pollinators. Tons of wading birds and raptors. Lots of beavers. Lots of deer. I didn't grab a picture of deer, but lots of deer on the refuge. So hopefully that'll whet your appetite a little bit to explore the refuge. We exist first and foremost for that wildlife, but we also love for people to come and have experiences on the refuge. And I'll say it's the thing that amazes me year after year, that each part of the refuge and each season is just a completely different experience. It looks like a different place throughout each season. And you can take trails that have already been blazed, or we have that wilderness area where you can kind of set off and find your own way. The wilderness area actually includes the Mingo River, so you can, paddle, you can kayak or canoe on the river, and no motorized equipment at all is allowed in the wilderness. So it's a very tranquil and solitary experience. So on wildlife refuges in general, we are a little bit more controlled about what we allow people to do, because we are protecting wildlife first and foremost. So we allow what is called wildlife dependent recreation, basically just things that don't kind of interfere with wildlife's ability to live healthy lives. So one of those things that we allow is wildlife observation. And I'm showing people on foot, but we also have 30 miles of auto tour roads. The longest one is closed for 3 months in the winter, but otherwise there you could spend the whole day just driving around the refuge in, again, different landscapes, different settings. And what we're showing here are a couple of parts. They're actually all parts that are connected to the Boardwalk Trail. One of the other things that we encourage people to do is nature photography. When things are more normal, I do some interpretive programs or some education programs on nature photography in our visitor center. I'll talk a little bit more about the visitor center in a minute. Fishing, we also encourage fishing and have a huge diversity of fish species on the refuge. I know one of the kind of favorites is bowfin or grinnell, not necessarily to eat, but because they're fun to catch. So, and some people like to eat them too, but lots of catfish. We stock catfish and bass in certain places on the refuge. A lot of people fish for other canned fish as well. Both in what I'm showing here is the Mingo River. The catfish is in one of our ponds called May Pond, and there's great bank fishing all along those ditches that I mentioned. So lots of opportunities for fishing. We do allow hunting on the refuge, and it's its own topic and pretty expansive. So I'll just mention that we have a separate, we have a hunting brochure and information on our website if you want to look into the details. This is somebody hunting for waterfowl in one of our flooded timber areas, that bottomland hardwood forest I was mentioning. And it's a pretty unique experience. You wade out in the water, set up decoys, and don't use a boat or anything. So it's kind of a unique thing that people really enjoy. The hunting draw is managed through the state conservation area that borders a Step Creek conservation area. We also do a lot of learning at Mingo. I host a lot of field trips in normal years. I can't wait to get back to it. Things have been quiet this past year. But we have groups come out anywhere from pre-K to college age, and we learn a lot about aquatic macroinvertebrates, forest ecology, just kind of an endless amount of topics that I, kind of create custom for school groups, or we also follow the Missouri Department of Conservation's Discover Nature Schools curriculum, which is a fantastic basis for a lot of what we do. And in addition to all those things that I mentioned, we also allow bicycling, horseback riding, paddling, collecting wild edibles. Those all have some rules associated with them, and I'm more than happy to give more information, or there's a brochure on our website that kind of goes into detail about all of those things as well. Again, in normal times, we have a beautiful visitor center where we host lots of educational classes and interpretive programs. We have an art gallery wall, an art gallery area, exhibits, a lovely kind of sunroom where you can watch the bird feeders, and with a little children's library. We're normally open Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 4, from December through February, and then the rest of the year Monday through Saturday, 8:30 to 4. And I'm hoping that we will be open again real soon. We're not currently open. We haven't reopened since COVID. And we hope to soon with some um, uh, mitigating standards in place. Um, as of now, you'd have to wear a mask in the building and keep social distancing outside. Um, but we just hope to get open again so that we can welcome visitors back in a safe way. A couple other just pictures of the visitor center. We, like I mentioned, have the art exhibit area, so we host some art exhibits, paintings, photography, things related to nature. So this is one of our exhibitors who's actually doing a kind of a painting demonstration at his art gallery, his art opening. So that was fantastic. Um, Lots of crafts happen when we're open too. You can also, once we open again, check out some things at the visitor center to go do your own exploring. We have some backpacks that have some educational materials in them and binoculars, a whole bunch of things to help your visit. And then you can also check out fishing gear for fishing on the refuge. All of it's free. We don't charge anything for any of our programs. We do normally have an entry fee to the refuge of $3 per day, or we have an annual pass for $12, but it's waived right at the moment until we get the visitor center open again. So really, that is what I put together. Leave you with a few other pretty pictures. And Melody had asked me to comment on if I had to pick one thing that I love about the park, what would it be? And I'll cheat a little bit because I don't know that I could pick one thing, but I'll go back to that phenomenon that I've noticed since I've been here, is that I feel like I'm in a different place each part of the year, because it looks completely different. It is just a new experience. I'm always finding something new no matter where I go. And I have only touched on really a portion of what there is to do at Mingo. We have a trail that goes out to a Depression era cabin. That is one of my favorite spots. You know, there's so many things to discover. So I guess I'll leave it at that. My favorite thing is that I'm always discovering something